Hey everyone, this is a video on the Mordekaiser rework and how it was a failure. Um, who am I? Doesn't really matter. I'm not a particularly interesting or known individual. Doesn't matter who I am, basically. Just gonna get right to it. So, in the Mordekaiser rework, the 2019 rework, moving away from the Certainly T Mordekaiser rework of 2015. Um, Mordekaiser lost his viability in every role. Um, he was viable top mid jungle ADC, much lesser extent support, but it could still be done. It was just pretty troll. So some just like notable players from these mentioned roles. Top you had Kaiser Mord, King of Elo Hell. Mid you had Mid Mordekaiser, Cat Evolved. Um, jungle, Apocalypse. Love him or hate him. Played more jungle. ADC, I'm a Cutie Pie didn't necessarily play him a lot, but he was known to play him a little bit. Tasty Potato X, get into that later. Panzer Dragon played him a little bit. Kaiser Mord played him ADC as well. I'm not actually sure which role Minute played, which was one of the people who was invited to playtest the new Mordekaiser. He doesn't even play Summoner's Rift anymore. He plays TFT. Um, Mordekaiser lost the viability of keystones, like her versatility, rather. Old Mordekaiser, you could run Phase Rush, you could run Summonary, which was the most common, uh, Electrocute, Halo Blades, basically any rune. You could run Guardian, was extremely common bot lane for ADC Mordekaiser. Now, if you don't take Conqueror, you're pretty much trolling, and that's extremely boring. Um, most champions, like Mordekaiser now, has one or two good keystones, and that was something that made old Mordekaiser extremely interesting. You could switch it up into certain matchups, or just if you wanted to have fun. It's boring to run the same thing every game. And that goes into the next thing. It's the same way with his builds. Old Mordekaiser had hybrid scalings, so he could build pretty much whatever he wanted, including tank items because of the way he worked with health. Now, if you don't build Rylai's Leandries, two core items, he did typically build those as well, but you could build full AD or full tank Mordekaiser and have fun. Now he has a very set in stone build that if you do not follow, like with Conqueror, you're pretty much trolling. Um, and this is very odd for Mordekaiser because with the other recent reworks, for the champions that did have AE or hybrid scalings, they kept them. Aurelia, Kayle, Ezreal, Akali, they all kept their hybrid scalings. And I believe Riot cited they didn't want him to be too dependent on Gunblade for his rework, and that's why they didn't add the hybrid scalings. But Kayle became more dependent on Gunblade after her rework, even though she had hybrid scalings to begin with. Um, I don't know why it's okay for like Akali to be dependent on Gunblade. Relia doesn't build Gunblade. Ezreal really doesn't either. He can, but he doesn't. It's a very cop out excuse. Uh, he went from having one of the best wave clears in the game, which, I mean, that's just part of his identity, is having great wave clear. Now he has extremely poor wave clear in the early game. Um, and his laning phase is very, very poor pre 6, which this pretty much eliminates his mid viability just off the terrible wave clear. So, you know, that's part of the reason he's not viable mid. Other reasons to get into later. Um, and in addition to not having as much rune choice or build choice, can't really, there's no like skill maxing choice either. Old Mordekaiser, or certainly Team Mordekaiser, he went Emax in the jungle, almost always W max everywhere else. If you were playing AD, you could max Q. Now you max Q, second max E. There's never a situation where you don't do that. And this is a pretty minute complaint. It's not really a complaint at all. Almost every champion has like the one superior skill order. It was just something that was, moderately interesting. He went from old Mordekaiser actually had very, very bad base stats, namely health. But some of his base stats in the rework actually got worse, even before the initial hotfix nerfs when he was released. They lowered Mordekaiser's AD. I can't remember exactly what the base AD was for certainly T Mordekaiser, but it was higher. And Riot commented on his rework saying they wanted him to feel like he used his mace. So you're going to lower his AD, but you want him to be a physical attacker. It's just odd. I don't know. It doesn't really matter either, honestly. It's a pretty small complaint like the skill diversity. He lost a lot of skill expression, namely in the micromanagement department. Old Mordekaiser's ult, Children of the Grave, you controlled 2 champions at once. Not exactly the same because you're not using abilities, but you still had to position the ghost. It was extremely hard to master, but once you did it, it was huge. There was a very, very big and clear difference between a good Mordekaiser player and a bad Mordekaiser player, and just doesn't exist anymore. And old Mordekaiser also had very clear moments of weakness if you actually understood what the champion did. He walked up to the wave, he W'd it, he cleared the wave. His W was basically his entire kit, more or less. His W's down, you go in. New Mordekaiser's passive doesn't have a cooldown. He can miss everything. He can still proc his passive just by auto attacking you to death. He had a very interesting kit. This is kind of a subjective thing, but he was designed to be an ADC, which is pretty much unheard of. The only other melee quote unquote viable ADC is Yasuo, who wasn't even designed to be an ADC. So they just scrapped this unique idea that they had instead of trying to make it work. He had the XP share, the ghost, and the shield passive, and they were all very unique mechanics. And they could have just kept trying to flush him out, or given him a champion spotlight, which we'll get to later as well. But they just scrapped it. And back to the champion spotlight, he was never given a chance to even succeed. How can Riot expect a champion to succeed if he's the only champion who has never had a champion spotlight? He was out for 10 years. He didn't have a champion spotlight when he first came out. He didn't have a champion spotlight when he was the Certainly T rework in 2015. So of course his play rate's going to be low. Of course people aren't going to know what he does if you don't show them what he does. Every other champion has a spotlight, or they get one when they're reworked. He's been reworked. He didn't have one in 2015. You can't expect the champion to do well. He was set up for failure by Riot. And this is really shown that it's a poor rework by the just mass exodus of high elo personalities or Mordekaiser one tricks. Cat Evolved played quite a bit of Mordekaiser, doesn't touch him at all anymore. Same with Pansar Dragon. Mid Mordekaiser actually completely stopped uploading to YouTube, changed his name on Twitch, completely distanced himself from the champion. King of Elo Hell is also very vocal about his dislike for the rework. I'm a Cutie Pie doesn't play him anymore. Again, didn't play him massively. Tasty Potato X was an ADC Mordekaiser player. He was the owner of the just clean Mord club tag on NA. He just completely quit the game. And like I said earlier, Minute, who was one of the people who got to play test New Mord, stopped playing Summoner's Rift as well. He just plays TFT. And you don't have anyone who plays Mordekaiser anymore other than Kaiser Mord. Kaiser Mord is the only high elo Mordekaiser player who still plays Mordekaiser. And even he, I believe, doesn't prefer new Mordekaiser. He just still plays. He preferred old Mordekaiser. His ban rate skyrocketed. And, old Mordekaiser, the one I'm referring to, was a certainly T champion. So he was, he had a lot in his kit. And he wasn't banned very often. And this champion's banned more than that. So that's a problem. People do not like playing against new Mordekaiser. It's just very unfun. He's a stat check champion. And one thing Riot said with the Mordekaiser rework is that they wanted to take this opportunity to make an easier champion. Because if you look back on the other reworks, Aurelia, pretty skill expressive champion. Ezreal, Akali, they both have, or they all are all skill expressive. Every rework up to this point kind of made the champion harder. So Riot said they wanted to make Mordekaiser easy. Which, why would you do this with Mordekaiser when you're reworking Pantheon right after and you made him harder? You kept everything in Pantheon's kit and you just made it better and a little bit more skill expressive. And for Mordekaiser, they did the exact opposite. They tore basically his entire kit apart and made him a stat check. His ultimate is like the biggest stat check in the game. He's very reliant on CDR, and AP Bruiser items are pretty lackluster in CDR. Kind of overall, other than Leandry's, they're not very good. I know this is going to be changed in the future, but he's lived with this for a year now. And he's an extremely binary champion. Like I said, he's a stat check. So he either wins the fight if he's ahead, or he just loses and never has a chance to succeed. He's extremely boring to play and play against. There's no skill expression. And on top of that, he's not even good. Like compared to old Mordekaiser, Season 8 Mordekaiser, which would be certainly Team Mordekaiser, over 81 games played, he was banned 100 games and had a 59% win rate. Season 9, which was partially new Mordekaiser, he was played 100 games, banned 160 games, had a 51% win rate. And then Season 10, this is purely new Mordekaiser, 737 picks, 749 bans, 49% win rate. He's not good in high elo. These are professional games. His win rate's lower because there's no skill expression. You can't do anything on him. He's like Garen. He's AP Garen. And Mordekaiser was one of the few top laners who could actually carry the game because of his either macro through getting control of the dragon and then taking out towers, or having a ghost and basically controlling two champions at once. And it's not like this was something that just you face rolled. You had to master it. And again, he completely lost his identity. Aurelia didn't change much in her rework. She kept her stun. She kept her Q dashes. Ezreal wasn't really a rework in all fairness, but he just had a change W for the most part. Kayle is pretty much the same champion. She got shifted around quite a bit, but she has the same playstyle, same fundamental idea. Kali keeps her passive, her shroud, more or less, her dashes. Akali's, again, the same principle. She's an engine. Cool. Nunu kept his Q, his ult. Mordekaiser genuinely kept nothing from his kit. You could argue that he kind of kept his W and his passive, but not really. He kept a AoE damage ability, I guess you could argue, but it's not the same. He's not the same champion at all. And this kind of just goes to show how much his kit changed. All of his good matchups turned into extremely bad matchups, and his bad matchups turned into good matchups. Like, for example, old Mordekaiser was extremely good into like Riven and Renekton, Aurelia. A lot of the bruisers, he just outtraded them early, and mid lane assassins. Now Mordekaiser struggles into those, especially early, and he dumpsters tanks. And it's the opposite of how it used to be. His kit just did a 180. He has 2 damaging spells. Riot, again, wanted him to feel like he used his mace, like he was a warlord. He is a warlord. And he has 2 damaging spells. He's a very low damage champion. He has really poor scalings. He has level-based scalings, so he's like forced to be a late-game champion. He has no AP scaling on his heal, so you're really not supposed to build a lot of damage on him. You have to build health for sustain and tank. He's the only Juggernaut who does not have a form of sustain. Like his W, you use it to trade. And if you have the little bit of excess of shield left, you consume it for a little tiny heal. But you typically almost always use it as a shield to trade. Every other Juggernaut has a heal. Darius has his Q. Garen, if you consider him a Juggernaut, has his passive. Set has his passive. Urgot just buys a Vamp Scepter. Mid Mordekaiser actually made a video recently. Partially what inspired me to make this. He goes into a little more detail. I can't remember all the Juggernauts off the top of my head, but every other Juggernaut has sustain, and Mordekaiser does not. It's just like a why? How did you overlook this? He's supposed to be a Juggernaut, and he has no sustain. His laning phase is bad pre-6. It's just bad. So he went from a damage champion to a tanky champion. And level 1, certainly Team Mordekaiser's W, outdamaged a max rank new Mordekaiser, Q or E, unless it's isolated. And even then, it's not a significantly large damage. And this is with 0 AP. And here I'm actually going to go into some damage numbers real quick. It's kind of monotonous, but just as a disclaimer, the AD and health-based numbers are a little estimated because I can't find the correct base stats for old Mordekaiser anymore. They're just not out there. So the AD is going to be a little bit lower than it should be for old Mordekaiser. So this means the Q damage is going to be a little underestimated, and his shield value is going to be a little overestimated. So an old Mordekaiser build would be Gunblade, Rylai's, Liandry's, Morello, and Deathcap. Obviously boots, but they don't really go into the calculation. And an example of a new Mordekaiser build would be Nashor's, Rylai's, Liandry's, Spirit Visage, and Zhonya's. And there's 3 different kinds of calculations that I did for this. There's a full rotation, which is just 3 auto attacks to proc old Mordekaiser's Q and new Mordekaiser's passive. So 3 auto attacks, a 10-second duration. This accounts for standing in new Mordekaiser's passive for 10 seconds, and old Mordekaiser's alt duration of 10 seconds. And we're giving new Mordekaiser an isolated Q, and it's also just going to have a heal value. There's no limits, which is 3 auto attacks, just because calculating the timers for auto attacks, again, I don't have numbers for. And abilities went up based on the CDR in their build, and a 4-second duration. So this is just no limits, but for 4 seconds. No limits at 10 seconds. So new Mordekaiser with old Mordekaiser build has 169 AD, 634 AP. So his passive would deal 205 plus 5% max health and 245 on hit. His Q does 675 or 944 isolated, 901 value shield, or a 450 heal. Keep in mind this heal decreases for every amount of damage the shield takes. His E does 521, and his ult just does a fixed 10% max health true damage. So for a full rotation with this build, Mordekaiser would do 4,277, 50% max health, 10% max health true damage, and the 901 or 450 heal. No limits, 5,221, 50% max health, 60 or 10% max health true damage, same heal, same shield. And in 4 seconds, he does 3,047, 20% max health, 10% max health true damage, same value heal. And new Mordekaiser with new Mordekaiser. It's going to do 123 plus 5% max health per second, and then 143 on hit, and another 69 from Nashor's Tooth. Q's going to do 509, 712 isolated, 947 shield, 473 heal. A little more health, so the heal's bigger, shield's bigger. He's going to do 355. 10% max health true damage from the ult, expected. Full rotation. Little less damage than having more AP. The CDR makes a difference. No limits, we can see damage is pretty similar. Only goes up by about 200. And in 4 seconds, damage again drops by about 200. And now we're looking at old Mordekaiser numbers. So this is old Mordekaiser with an old build. His max shield was about 901. And this kept going up and down, depending on how much damage he was dealing and taking. His Q did 752 plus 752 plus 1503. 3006 total. His W did 871 over 4 seconds, and then 380 pop. 1251 total. And then a 380 per target for up to 2 targets. And that's for champions, amount of heal, or 95 for minions. His E did 637 damage, and his ult would do 60.4% max health damage over 10 seconds. So a full rotation, he did 4,890 plus 60% max health. So you can see this is only about 60% more, or 600 damage more than new Mordekaiser with the same build. But the shield value is quite a bit larger. And this is not on a cooldown. The shield was not on a cooldown. And this is also excluding the passive from his E and the damage from his ultimate, the shield calculation. And the heal was slightly less. No limits. So again, this is 10 seconds, just spamming abilities. Double the damage of new Mordekaiser. And a substantially larger shield. Again, excluding his E passive and damage from his ultimate. Again, slightly lower heal because there's a lot of health from this build. And the 4 seconds. Again, 50% more damage than new Mordekaiser with a higher shield value. And then we're just going to look at old Mord with a new build. Say, hey, maybe the build's bad. No. Again, damage higher. Damage more than twice as high. With a substantially higher shield value. And again, damage higher. And this is presented in like the best way possible for new Mordekaiser, these numbers, because you're just standing in new Mordekaiser's passive for 10 seconds. Old Mordekaiser could rotate his abilities on you and walk away, and he would significantly outdamage old Mordekaiser, or new Mordekaiser. So, new Mordekaiser does less damage. He has a smaller shield on a cooldown, a long cooldown, and you have to choose between his shield and his heal. So, he just has to build tanky. And then he does no damage. And there's just some really shallow complaints, but they're still just things of his identity. Like, he turned into basically Camille. I believe Aatrox is the same way, actually, where if he's not saying a voice line and he uses an ability, he's going to say something. And, for Camille and Aatrox, it's not really an issue because they have so many voice lines that, they don't repeat themselves over and over. But Mordekaiser has like 2 or 3 voice lines for each ability. So every time you use Q, he's going to say Shatter, Crumble. W, he's going to say Iron stands eternal. And such paltry blows. Like he doesn't have enough voice lines to support this. He just talks too much and repeats himself over and over. It doesn't really matter. It's just, you can tell that they didn't care about the champion by the fact that they didn't add any voice lines. His ability names went from really nice ability names. They were Iron Man, Mace of Spades, Harvester of Sorrow, Siphon of Destruction, and Children of the Grave. They're edgy names, but they're like poetically edgy, like Karthus. Now it sounds like a 13-year-old came up with them. It's Darkness Rise, Obliterate, Indestructible, Death's Grasp, and Death Realm. Two of the names have death in it, and one has darkness. Like it's literally like a 13-year-old came up with it. It's just not creative. It's edgy. It's just straight edgy. Um, he has blue eyes. Really shallow complaint when you think about it, but he's not a Shadow Isles champ. He never was. He went to the Shadow Isles, um, but he founded Noxus, so he had like a balance of Shadow Isles and Noxus design elements. Um, and now it's pretty indistinguishable from a just standard Shadow Isles champion. Even his vocals are very Shadow Islesy. Like he sounds like Hecarim. It's just really lazy. And then his visual effects when they updated him, they hardly got changed. Again, Min Mordekaiser touches on this a lot. Infernal Mordekaiser, the cheapest skin, has unique effects, but Lord Mordekaiser, Dragon Knight Mordekaiser, they don't. King of Spades Mordekaiser doesn't either. They got really lazy rush designs, and it's only because one Riot art designer wanted to work on them, and they gave him a really small amount of time, and he did what he could. He's the only person who cared to update the skins, and I don't remember the guy's name, but props to that guy. He cared about the champion, and he did his best. But Riot just didn't care. They didn't work on this champion. And then you see on Twitter, Mark Yetter asks Udyr mains if they want like a full update or if they want just like a modernization of Udyr's current kit. Like, how can you care for certain small player bases but not for others? The Mordekaiser player base grew, sure, but it's not people who played him. You're filling spots that weren't needed to be filled. And just real quick, we're going to look at like Mordekaiser's popularity. You can see he was never played very much, sure. This was around his first rework, I believe. 7% play rate, fluctuated around 2%, and then his rework in 2019 shot up. But you can see people are stopping playing him. He's not fun. He's not a fun champion. And if you compare this, Kale played about the same amount as old Kale. So Kale didn't get a fundamental massive change. Kale just got a little tweak. And compare Mordekaiser's win rate, or just touching on the fact that he's not a good champion. 2019 rework. See, this is his ban rate actually. 80% ban rate. People don't like playing against it. Look at his win rate. See something? It's a little lower. He's not a good champion. And again, back to like the popularity. Here's Skarner. Less than a 2% play rate. He hasn't been reworked. Ivern. Less than a 2% play rate. Fluctuates a little here and there. He hasn't been reworked. Asol. Quite a bit less than a 2% play rate for the most of the time. Not been reworked. They just never cared about this champion. You can tell by the way they've never released a champion spotlight until his 2019 rework. They didn't care what his fans thought. They didn't invite people who actually played Mordekaiser to give their thoughts on the Mordekaiser rework when it was being developed. They haven't heard any complaints. Like with the Aatrox rework, it was very poorly received at the start. I understand that. But they made so many changes. They got rid of the revive. They made the revive only on a kill. They removed the minion healing. They gave him substantially more healing on champions. They changed the way his dashes were. They turned Aatrox back into a drain tank like he was before the rework. He kept that part of his identity at least. Of course, you're not going to be able to make every person happy, but substantially more Aatrox players are now happy with the Aatrox how he is now than they were when the Aatrox rework first came out. And Riot hasn't changed a single thing about Mordekaiser. I don't expect a revert. That's not realistic. I know that. But Riot hasn't even made the smallest change that isn't just a numeric nerf to Mordekaiser because they don't care. They're not going to. It's not enough people care about this champion, and it's just sad. But you know, thanks guys for watching. But it's a shame.